Now, it reminds me of what Thomas Jefferson had to say about mob rule. He was making an assumption that a democratic process can present a majority party, 51% rule, but can turn out to compromise its ideals by condoning a form of a tyranny of the majority. Quote, a democracy in that regard is nothing more than mob rule, where 51% of the people may take away the rights of the other 49, precisely in our case in Malaysia. The only difference is Jefferson was dealing with an election process that is clean and fair. We had seen a corrupt system, a fraudulent process. But certainly, with or without a clean process, electoral process, this is not our ideal of a democracy. Here, as was referred to by Jefferson, is clearly a rule that can be referred to or described as the despotism of the majority, where governments and authorities abuse power, develop dictatorial tendencies, compromise the legal process, and allow the judiciary to become a rubber stamp or under the thumbs of the executive. Ambiga has more expertise on this. Now, this concentration of power invariably leads, again, to the abuse of the legislative process. We happen to be in Parliament these days, speaking to empty chairs in front. There is no vibrant debate. I remember as finance minister, 8 years as finance minister, I make it a rule. And every time after my budget speech, the leader of the opposition will have to respond the following Monday. And you can ask Kit Siang, as then opposition leader, I have not failed once to listen and take notes, however much hard-hitting, difficult it was to sit there to listen, but that is what democracy and democratic practice is all about. All these years, here now, not once do you find the finance minister listening to issues articulated by the opposition. That explains volumes of the sheer arrogance of power, moral indignance towards what the others have to say. So on the issue of corruption, this reminds me again, in my young days at the University of Malaya, Guna Mirda was of course a popular economist. And his Asian drama was somewhat a textbook. Syed Hussein Ali wouldn't, of course, share many of his views. And many of us then realized that the criticism of Guna Mirda was focused mainly to the developing world. So there was then a growing number of intellectuals, academicians in the developing countries that saw this devastating critique by Guna Mirda as nothing more than a condescending view of the West towards the developing world. Now this discourse has somewhat shifted. There is growing realization that corruption is not necessarily an Asian problem or an Asian drama or dilemma. It is a universal disease. But to use an excuse like the Asian values to defend the excesses of Malaysia or Southeast Asia by saying that our Asian values must give due regard to filial piety and respect for the elders and authority, and therefore ignore core issues like judicial independence or corruption or abuse of power is now no longer accepted. Therefore, we can reread Najmuddin Navaratnam just to portray the extent and the damage caused in developing countries itself, backed and supported by some of these big foreign Western foreign companies. But I think since then, we have Hussein Alatta's Sociology of Corruption, which was then, I think, by the 80s, quite popularly known to many of our intellectuals and graduates. And I think that sort of discourse must remain to be alive. Otherwise, people are getting a bit disillusioned and now growing to be cynical. But without clear strategy, clear action plan, nothing is going to change. You leave it to the Malaysian Anti-Corruption Commission. You leave it to all these glorious names of integrity panel and whatever you may have said with respect to Tan Sri Megat and Najmuddin. Nobody has any trust in the capacity of these institutions having any impact. The worst that you can imagine is the disappearance of the dead NGOs. Zaid was saying that it's comparable to Zimbabwe. I disagree with him, because Zimbabwe would protect the security establishment in the more organized manner. Whatever excesses they may have in Zimbabwe, but at least they have that. We have even failed in that. In our entire security establishment, the only sector that's been protected is probably the special branch. Because that's the only institution that probably be able to hold UMNO and the ruling establishment together. So, ladies and gentlemen, we are in a very, not only critical, precarious environment. Don't talk about competitiveness. We have lost it long ago. Don't talk about competing with Singapore, Taiwan, South Korea. We used to talk a decade ago. Now we're talking about losing competitiveness to Indonesia, Vietnam, and Thailand. Don't talk of foreign direct investments. We're not competing countries like China and India. It's completely irrelevant. We're talking about losing foreign direct investments to Indonesia, Thailand, and Vietnam. Of course, our leaders still take great pride, and I agree with them, when they compare us to Zimbabwe and Burma. We are doing quite well in that regard. So, we have, of course, a very distinguished panel. I have me and my colleagues at Pakatan Rakyat have decided to move on. We do not believe that the system can be repaired. Our position is that UMNO and Barisan Nasional has no moral credits to stay. They must be removed to save this country.